Welcome to EdLeader with your host, Dr. Rob Jackson. Join Dr. Jackson for conversations and reflections on improving educational leadership from the classroom to the boardroom and beyond. Educational leadership is an ever-evolving opportunity to make a real and lasting difference in the lives of students, parents, and the community. And now, here's your host, Dr. Rob Jackson.
Hi, friends. Welcome to a very special episode of the EdLeader podcast. I'm your host, Rob Jackson, and I want to thank you for spending time with me today. Leadership development is a passion of mine. I believe that EdLeaders can learn from leaders in all professions. This episode is a perfect example of just that. Remember, show notes for every episode are available at drrobjackson.com. Let's get to it. Today's guest was commissioned as a second lieutenant upon graduation from the United States Naval Academy in 1992. He was designated as a Naval Aviator in 1994 and was selected to fly the CH-46E Sea Knight. He has served in all three active Marine aircraft wings, including the Black Knights, the White Knights, and the Flying Tigers. He also commanded the Knightriders of Marine Medium Helicopter Training Squadron 164. He has served on multiple deployments, including Bosnia with the NATO Peace Implementation Force for Operation Joint Endeavor in 1995, and as a part of the NATO Stabilization Force for Operation Joint Guard. He's been deployed to the Philippines for a humanitarian assistance and disaster relief mission, to Indonesia and Thailand with combined support forces in support of regional tsunami relief efforts, and Joint Task Force Caring Response to Myanmar. In 2007, he deployed with the Flying Tigers to Al Taqaddum in Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom. It was the squadron's first combat operation since the Vietnam War. In addition to various staff assignments, he's also served as the Weapons and Systems Engineering Instructor at the United States Naval Academy. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Systems Engineering from the United States Naval Academy, a Master's of Science degree in Applied Physics from the Naval Postgraduate School, and a Master's of National Security Strategy from the United States Army War College. He assumed the duties of Deputy Commander for Marine Corps Installations East in August 2019. Marine Corps Installations East helps to command 6 Marine Corps bases. He previously served as the commanding officer of the Marine Corps Air Station, Cherry Point. Please help me welcome my very special guest, Marine Corps Colonel Todd Ferry.
Colonel Ferry, welcome to the EdLeader podcast. I can't tell you how honored I am to have you here. Thank you for your time today, sir.
Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, Colonel, I have to start with this, and that is by simply thanking you for your service to our country. Thanks certainly to the men and women you serve with. I absolutely appreciate what your team does every single day, which allows our team to be able to provide an education in this country. So thank you, and to your team, thank you for all you do for us.
Well, I appreciate it, sir. It's certainly an honor to serve like I have.
Well, let's start, if you don't mind, Colonel Ferry. You have this incredible opportunity for service in the position you hold. Our listeners are all over the country and some in other countries. Kind of share in a general way, what is it that you do with your days?
Okay, so I've been a United States Marine for now 28 years. Helicopter pilot by trade. My first duty station was here in Eastern North Carolina, so it's kind of a welcome back. In 2016, I moved from Germany back to here, and I got the unique opportunity at that time in 2016 to command the Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. And why I bring that up is we have about 24 bases and stations across the world. Just like the other services have bases and stations or garrisons, the Army call them Navy yards. And they appoint an officer to be a commandant. And so now the unique thing is we don't get trained in that at all. So if you are familiar with government, you become kind of a mayor of a town as well as a city manager. And so none of us really grow up understanding that, having kind of the civil education or experience in that. We just, either come from our backgrounds, whether it's logistics or aviation like myself or the infantry, and then we're kind of thrust into this, and we get to learn. So I got to kind of cut my teeth at Cherry Point, learning and understand how you run a city like Cherry Point. And I left there a year ago and moved south to Jacksonville, North Carolina from there. And where I'm now the deputy commander of Camp Lejeune. There's a general, Major General Dale Alford, the commanding general. I'm basically his number 2 in charge. And we also have a regional responsibility. There's 6 bases and stations here, Cherry Point being the northernmost one, Blunt Island in Jacksonville, Florida. So we kind of oversee an entire region of bases and stations. And so kind of our partnership is not only to look at the city, equivalent, the base at Camp Lejeune, but the region as well.
Just trying to put my head around all the things that you have to do in leading a base like Cherry Point or helping to lead Camp Lejeune and all the other bases you have responsibilities for. It's just mind-blowing. And you mentioned kind of having to learn on the fly a little bit. You have a unique background, certainly as a pilot, but you also have, as I shared in the introduction, a master's degree in applied physics. How does that background in a quote-unquote hard science, how does that guide your approach to leadership, or does it guide your approach to leadership?
So I'm not sure, as leaders, so the nice thing about being in the military, it doesn't matter what you studied, whether you're history, English, political science, or one of the hard sciences, engineering, like I came out of. I was an engineer as a Bachelor of Science and Systems Engineering from the Naval Academy. I eventually got an opportunity to do applied physics as a master's. So leadership, I don't think it necessarily translates from that, but it's certainly what it has done. One of the reasons, especially as aviation, with an aviation background, and certainly as technology has changed and become so more prominent in military affairs, I very much appreciate my engineering background and my science backgrounds to help understand whether it's the new technology. So when I was at Monterey, when I had to study radars and electro-optics and lasers and all the stuff that are very prominent, not only around the world, but certainly in the military. As we just talked, education, it's just, the more time you spend in educational institutions, the more I fall in love with it and understand, professionals who, do this for a living. I appreciate them a lot.
Absolutely. And I might mention, you mentioned education. You had the opportunity to serve as a teacher and instructor at the Naval Academy. And so what was that like, kind of moving from a line officer position to the teaching opportunity, and then, of course, back to what you're doing now?
So it was an incredible 3 years. Of course, that's where I graduated from in 1992. It was an incredible honor to go back and to see it from the other side. As a midshipman, you don't appreciate the leadership that, the institution is much, maybe a few years later coming back with a much more different, vision, a different set of eyes to see it. So incredible student, body there who just, they're both focused on their academics, but more so serving the nation, whether it's in the United States Navy or Marine Corps. So it was an honor for me to go back. Probably personally, there was a time where I really saw myself, one of the things, being around faculty like that at a collegiate level and just discussing, especially among the military faculty, one of the things I loved it. I loved every day there, teaching, mentoring, shaping the next generation, getting into the science. I taught engineering there and understanding that. But I learned a lot about myself because I would have conversations with my peers, and some of them just did not enjoy it. They were there on a set of orders. They had to do it, but it wasn't. And so I think that personally, as I took a step back and just kind of learn more about myself, I realized, wow, I really do enjoy this. The guy in the next cubicle, the next office, does not enjoy this so much. He can't wait to get back and go do the things that the military does. And so that was just one of those things that, in life that I've just taken away from that 3 years. Like, wow, I do have a passion for education and leadership and mentorship and shaping the next generation.
Well, and I tell you what, that passion shows. I certainly never had the opportunity to have you as an instructor, but I initially had an introduction to you. I was recently honored to be invited to a tabletop training exercise at Camp Lejeune, and you kind of kicked things off and began to talk about how the pandemic really impacted your work in in leading these bases and leading these communities and serving, as you shared, as a pseudo mayor of these communities. Share with our listeners, what was that like when this pandemic hit? How did that kind of impact the work you do on a daily basis?
So that's a great question. We certainly started seeing conversations maybe December and January about, especially in Asia. We were looking at the 8th Army and our forces over in Korea, seeing what was going on over there. And but at that time in February, it seemed like it was something over there. And then even as it started coming, Italy started, coming down ill with this disease, and other Europe. Of course, we have a lot of bases in Italy and over in Europe. So we're kind of watching that. And then really March, so March, as we started just grappling with, hey, as it started, and maybe February, we started getting kind of questions from the Pentagon. And the questions, they would go out to all DoD bases and stuff like, hey, do you have the ability to house, personnel we're bringing from overseas? So if you go back and think about stuff like the cruise ship that was off the coast of California, those are the questions that the Pentagon was asking us. Hey, if we bring these 200, 300, whatever civilians are flying back from China, can you house them and basically quarantine them? So on bases, whether it was in San Antonio, whether it was in California, Miramar, one of our air stations there did do this, or us on the East Coast. At that time in February, it really looked like a West Coast thing and an Asia thing until we started seeing, like I said, moving over to Europe. So one of the things we had to do is, hey, we can't shut down the military.
Right.
So we can't shut it down. So we said, hey, we're not going to stop training. We're not going to stop deploying because the nation needs us, but what do we need to do to kind of curtail our activity? So one of the things we started in probably March timeframe is saying, hey, we need to start bringing units back. We need to start slowly canceling exercises and really to minimize DoD traffic around the world. Let's just keep, the ships out there, the forward deployed units and stuff like that. So what we started doing at that time is bringing forces back. And so as we started to bring forces back, whether inside the United States or outside, we had to figure, okay, where did they come from? Did they just come from Asia, Okinawa, where we have a lot of Marines? Where did they come? So we had to basically develop kind of procedures. Well, what do you do with 100 Marines who come back out of Europe? And so thankfully we had some excess capacity there on the base in our barracks, and we would take maybe 100 at a time, and we basically isolate them, quarantine them. And in fact, because of the term quarantine became kind of synonymous when you have, an illness, we had to develop an entirely new term that was new. It was called restriction of movement. We call them ROM. And so because if we said they're in quarantine, everybody assumed they had some sort of virus or they'd be exposed. So we would put them into and we'd say, okay, using CDC guidance, and, we say, okay, for 14 days, you're just ROM status, restrict, and we just watch. And there were certain days in between March and say early summer, we had up to 2,500 Marines kind of isolated like that in ROM status. So, now at the same time, we couldn't stop activity. So we really had to say, okay, so we started, shutting down, much like we're kind of reducing activity. So we never shut down the bases and station. We reduced activity. What did that look like? The Marine Corps kind of got a controversial, decision, or made which was, hey, we're going to keep barbershops open. That became interesting. So we didn't do it haphazardly or not taking, so we, made very restrictive as far as social distancing and everybody's masked up. We saw that was important, but we were one of the few services that did that. And we took a few laughs or, punches from the Army or Navy and stuff like that. But we shut down our gyms, we reduced, and then we had to define what is essential personnel. So typically when we talk essential personnel, especially here in Eastern North Carolina, it has to do with destructive weather. So we think, we do these drills every year, and we actually execute multiple times a year because of hurricanes. So we have basically lists of who's essential. And you can think when you shut down a base for a hurricane, it's pretty slim. You're talking about your, all your public works people just to get, in case a building or trees go down and stuff like that. And you also have stuff like your police and your fires, but everything else, your business is shut down. Well, that's kind of our template and playbook. And so we had to say, okay, what does essential personnel mean in the pandemic? Do we shut down our grocery store, which is called our commissary? Do we shut down all of our food venues? Do we shut, so we really had to wrestle with that. And then as we just made decisions to keep stuff open, well, how do you do it safely? So a good perspective for Camp Lejeune. Camp Lejeune is about 100,000 people. So you think about that size of city. Inside of that, you kind of have an attached airport at New River. You have as I've talked to college campuses and, leaders of colleges, we have a college campus in the middle. What I mean by that, we have about 20,000 Marines that are of college age, about 18 to 23 years old, all single, all living in what we call barracks. It's a college dormitory. We have 12 different feeding facilities, okay, which, we call our mess halls or our chow halls. We had to figure out how do you run that safely and not get anybody sick, and how do you continue to train? Because we didn't want to shut down everything from boot camp to our training stuff. And so probably the biggest takeaway is we didn't shut down, but we had to learn. And what we learned, the way we operated in February into March is much different than in the summer. So we learned, our first time that we had a positive case in a dining facility or a chow hall, we shut the whole chow hall down. We did a deep cleaning for multiple days and stuff like that. We don't do that anymore. We got better on how we compartmentalize people who work there. So in case someone's ill, we can take a certain number of people, do cleaning, but not, spending a lot of money, that kind of stuff. So that's, and the other thing we learned is we had schools on base. As we shut down in March and everybody went home, we said, well, we have CDCs. So not the disease control, but our child development centers, right? So we have 7 of them at Camp Lejeune in New River with 1,500 kids on a daily basis. So we said, okay, for essential personnel, we need to keep it open. What does that mean? So we went from 1,500 kids to about 250 kids, and we had kept 3 of them open. And then we had to learn, okay, how do you keep it open in a pandemic? When we have babies, like crib infants, which is kind of unique because of our younger military, especially dual spouses, we keep their babies all the way up to school age kids. So we had to figure out from a staff, and we had same thing. We have staff that say, I need to be protected because I'm in I've been working here 20 years, and I'm kind of a little bit older and stuff like that. I don't want to get exposed. And we have kindergartners running around who don't necessarily want to be socially distanced from their peers and stuff like that. So that's a great just kind of talking, how we did that. It's really just heroic for our CDC workers to do that.
Colonel, I heard you, as you were sharing in your remarks, you referred to that as lessons observed as opposed to perhaps lessons learned. Tell me and I love your way with words and thinking about how words matter, but why did you kind of land on this lessons observed as kind of the capturing all that you've picked up on as you've gone?
So, it's kind of a joke I've carried around for years. The military, we do a very good job of doing an after action or a hot watch or different terms where we take a look at an activity, an exercise, a deployment, something happened. And then we take a look, hey, what can we learn from this? What did we do and stuff like that? Whether I was an aviator, we go for a flight, come back, and we kind of break it down and we debrief it and stuff like that. So what you want to do is, my joke was, hey, if you go and you figure out, okay, here are the lessons learned from something, and you continue to repeat them or not transmit to someone else, which is important in this conversation. Can you share that so they learn from it? It just becomes a lessons observed. We observed a lesson, we move on, we didn't learn from it, which is a great, because we can, get focused on that and just move on and not learn. So part of it in this pandemic, we did learn lessons and we actually changed, which was good. We changed our procedures, we changed the way we did stuff. But the lessons kind of observed as we started reaching out and preparing for the schools open was, hey, for us to just observe the lessons and not to really, for this case, to start talking to the local school districts. It was important for us to say, hey, I think you guys on the outside, all the school districts at the collegiate level, all the way down to the CDCs in the local area, there's a lot of stuff we've learned we need to basically speak to the community about.
Absolutely. What has been, as you've had the opportunity to speak to universities and to school districts, what have been kind of the big takeaways that you've been able to really apply that they've just absolutely gravitated to?
I think going back to how we kept our CDCs open. So when we had our first case at a CDC, there was a lot of angst in the community. How do you communicate that as a school? Do I communicate it through Facebook now? Hey, we have and then how does the public react to that? there's a lot of fear. That's very rational fear based, it should be. And there's some irrational fear as well, especially in the March, April, May, June, So what we learned a lot was it was almost like you had to train, you had to train your school population. You had to train and make sure that your employees, your teachers and stuff like that feel safe and comfortable in the environment. You have to train your students how we're going to act, and one of the things we saw in this was there was a lot of angst about wearing masks. What we found was the kindergartner didn't care. In fact, they would put it on. We had a lot of fear of, hey, they were going to, not like it. Well, they put it on, and after a while, they didn't even, they would forget it was on. The people who had more problems with it were our adult workers, right? And so you can translate that into a school. As you get closer to an adult, like a high schooler would have much more difficulty, being wearing a mask in the kindergarten. We found that to be true. And then how do you communicate? Because in fact, our head of our CDCs would say we had to figure out the best way to communicate, to feel like there was honesty, because sometimes our first case that we had on Camp Lejeune, we had the first case. We knew it. We controlled. It was actually a family. We isolated them. We knew some of the kids got sick, recovered really quickly, but there was a lot of falsehoods in social media on Facebook saying, hey, we're covering stuff up, we're hiding stuff, a lot of stuff which was untrue. And what they were confusing were stuff when I mentioned if we took 100 service people back from Italy or Germany and we quarantined them or restriction of movement, they weren't ill. They were just in a place that was, they could have been exposed, but they had no symptoms. So a lot of the stuff would come up with distrust. And so one of the things we had to do is kind of convince the parents, hey, we have a case. We're not, and this is what it looks like. We were, it's in the school. It was in a classroom, So what has happened, there were a lot of fear and conversations. And what are you doing? And what you saw over the next month, 2 months was, okay, they got a case. And there was, okay, they got it. They're handling, I think there was a trust on both sides. They're handling it. They're doing their procedures. And we did a lot better, So we knew that, we don't want to expose the whole school. So just like you guys compartmentalize stuff so that if someone does get out, we can take, and kind of quarantine 10 kids, vice 40, 50, or 60. So that is certainly a lesson. And that's kind of, as I discuss, is I think the other thing I said, I think we needed to understand as we talk to schools is it takes a lot of resources to do this. So when, we have what we call public health emergency officers, PHEOs, we call them. That's really kind of a secondary job within people in our hospital, So we have, and our head one, it was one of our emergency room specialists, Captain Smith, Wayne Smith. So he was our head. Lieutenant Eric Green was our number 2, and they're phenomenal individuals. They really carried the weight. But one of the things they would say is in March, when everything started kind of settling down, we started kind of dialing back our operations. We were getting about 3 cases a week at Camp Lejeune. That's part of everything in our school systems back in March kind of shut down. But then as their activity started to get in the summer, in fact, 2 weeks ago, we had our highest spike, about 100. We had 116 of a week, So, how do you contract trace? One of the things we learned, it was very, very, very labor intensive. And so that's one of the things as I talk to schools, you talk about, lessons that we learned was, wow, we had to have a dedicated team, to trace, contract trace, that kind of stuff, and every time that we had a case, we look at, okay, what could we have done better? Did we expose too many, with the teachers, because what would happen often is kids would do pretty good and the teachers in a controlled environment, were doing really good. But when they would get together in a break room, we kind of on our guard. And then, when someone got ill, when you contract trace, you realize, oh, there was a lot of just kind of, I would say, undisciplined. They would let down that stuff, and then you realize, ooh, now we've contract traced. And so, we have to figure out, okay, how do we learn from that, transmit that, do better at that,
Absolutely. And that absolutely jives with our experience. I think that our students have done an incredible job with social distancing, and our teachers have done a great job with reminding them to wear their masks, to wait 6 feet apart, and to wash their hands frequently. But as they would get into lunch or the opportunity to collaborate. We teach our teachers the importance of collaboration, and that's what we do as educators. It's hard to kind of pull back from that. And so that was certainly a lesson observed and a lesson learned for us as we move forward. Colonel, you mentioned a couple of things I want to unpack. First of all, that transparency and honest communication with parents. And I agree with you, that's so crucial, particularly in this moment where we're all unsure of everything that's going on. We need to be sure of something, and honest communication from our school system or from our leaders, I think, is crucial. But you also mentioned the word parent. Colonel, you are a parent times 6. You have been blessed with 6. I know they must be amazing children and at various ages. And so I'd like to kind of transition a little bit away from your profession into what you do and what's probably most important to you, and that is this role of parent. How has this impacted your children and their educational experiences? And certainly I want to say how much I appreciate that your children are public school students or graduates, and that certainly resonates with me, Colonel. But how's this been for your kids and for you as a parent?
Well, first of all, I'll say how much I appreciate your teachers and the teachers in this area. You know, one of the things that as I get to sit and talk to the community that's important as a parent is, you know, teachers and coaches and youth group leaders who are so important in my life. And I think they're so important in the community's life because the voice they give to a parent. So it's, you know, having 6 kids, one of the things you realize is we're all, you know, born a certain way, and then you try to train them in a certain way, keep them going in the same direction, but they're all very, very different, you know, and, you know, oftentimes they don't listen to their parents. You know, I think back to my own life, the impact that I had, certainly my parents are unbelievable, still are, in pouring into my life. But as I think about a certain individual, the coaches, the teachers that impact me at all grade school levels up through college and stuff like that, youth group leaders, et cetera. So I'm always very, you know, that's important now we're talking about as a dad. So pandemic as a dad. So at that point in time, I had three children who are in college, who at East Carolina University, Chapel Hill, and UNC Asheville, a senior, junior, and a freshman. They came home in March on spring break. And like I said, 1 week turned to 2 weeks, turned into virtual school, turned into, you have about 10 days to come, get all your stuff from college and bring it back home. We're closing everything down. So I had those 3 come back and all the emotion wrapped up and, you know, hey, you know, I thought my spring semester was going to be one way. You know, in fact, one of my students, my youngest collegian, was a freshman. He plays for the Asheville soccer team. So they were in the spring season. They played about 3 games, came home spring break expecting to finish out. And, you know, just like you've seen the kind of the collegiate, you know, in the spring, certainly shut everything down as sports. You know, no March Madness is a big thing. At the same time, I had a high schooler, and then I had 2 middle schoolers. So now I had 6 kids all working virtually from home, you know. So I was one, as we entered into, you know, the professional conversations, how do we continue to operate? You know, I had a very soft heart for people who were having to juggle not only the professional responsibilities, so they had work and stuff like that, but also they became a secondary teacher. My wife and I are basically, my wife works in the Craven County in the school systems, up in the school here in Havelock. And so now you have to, you know, and for her, they shut down the school. She was able to come home and kind of help monitor and kind of get through this. So I was very, very appreciative of kind of I would say a common sense approach to this. Hey, we're going to get through this. We're going to, you know, kind of have some grace, you know, because this is not normal either for the teacher or the student, you know, whether the technology and stuff like that. How do you know, what are the requirements? What are we trying to get out of the rest of the school year? Now, certainly transitioning into the fall now, you know, we're kind of in a very similar, all 3 of my kids went back to college. They've stayed there, but they're all virtual. So they're on campus and they're virtual. So they've been able to, and I've been able to speak to at least 2 of those 3 colleges, Asheville and East Carolina, about, you know, how we've done stuff as far as the pandemic. But now I have 2 high schoolers now. I got a junior and a freshman and a 7th grader. Been very difficult because, like probably a lot of your teachers are experiencing, you know, I have obligations to go into Camp Lejeune and get to but then my wife is going out to prep, do her kindergarten or first grade and teacher assistant stuff she does. And then, so we have kind of a routine that's become very interesting. They're kind of a new normal, say, where, get up. She actually hits the road before I do. I'm the one who basically makes sure my kids are up in front of a Zoom camera and going, and so I watch the start. I listen to, 2 or 3 different instructors in high school and middle school, and then I leave. And so kind of my leadership at Camp Lejeune knows I come in a little later, and then our kids are kind of doing their own kind of Zooming for the next 3 or 4 hours. So my wife can come home. She comes home midday to kind of check on and stuff like that. It's been an interesting experience. It's been challenging, and I see that certainly across all of our employees at Camp Lejeune, whether, in our DoDEA schools, our teachers, on our or just our Marines, because we've had to juggle with and, the impact of, schools, and how important they are as a fabric of the community. When I talk about essential workers and like that, how essential they are, because schools, one of the eye-opening thing is not only educating our kids, but in many times they're childcare, right? They're actually taking care of our kids in the day. And one of the eye-opening for me, was aware, is they're feeding our kids. I was really blown away by the school districts that, even though we shut down schools in March, continued the feeding programs of kids that really needed it all the way through the summer and continue to do that. For me, who's really been around watching that, it's just something that I don't think the community really understands. We say it, but now you really, really understand.
Thank you for saying that, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you sharing your experiences. As a parent, that certainly has been eye-opening in terms of all of the ways that schools serve families. I don't know that educators really had a true appreciation for all the many things that schools do on a typical basis. I'm sure just like the military does on a typical basis, you don't see what you see every single day. Well, Colonel, one of the things that's a passion of mine is helping young leaders as they aspire to leadership and growing as leaders. If you had the opportunity, or as you have the opportunity to speak to young officers or new officers or new leaders, what are the words of advice that you tend to give new leaders as they begin to serve in that role? My
first thing I like to say is just I try to define what is a leader. I talk about what is a leader? What does it mean to be a leader? And I would always say the easiest definition, are you a leader, is to turn around and is somebody following you. It is. And that's the one thing I always challenge my young Marines, which says, hey, if somebody's following you, you are, a leader. Now, the question we start talking about, are you a good leader or a bad leader? Where are you taking them? What's the destination? What's the direction? Because everybody at leadership is influenced. So, so people at, kindergartners influence other kindergartners, generals influence, entire services, so if they're following you, you're a leader. Then the question is, hey, where are we taking them? So that's one of the challenges I always give to, my young Marines who are developing their own leadership skills. Hey, when they're sitting around on the weekends and stuff like that, you're leading, so you're leading people, whether you're, in work that day, it's pretty easy to see, how leadership should work, whether you're in aviation, infantry, so like that, or a basketball coach or coach. But the challenge would be to students certainly is, hey, where you're leading, especially, when you're away from observation, direct observation of higher leaders, are you leading them? So that's always the thing I put them, because we don't think we're influencing. One of the things I like to say is your influence is never neutral. So we have an opportunity to influence for good or for bad all the time. And so that's another thing I try to put in. It's just really basic, if your influence isn't neutral, how are you influencing people? And that's part of your leadership. Is someone following you, you're a leader. So that's those are the first nuggets I like to put in for the, early leadership kind of development.
Absolutely. And that sings. And, as you were sharing, what I heard you really reflecting on is the need for reflection, to really think about, are people following me? Where am I leading them to? What is the focus of this moment? And how can I grow as a leader? Well, as we kind of wrap up our conversation, Colonel, and I think I could stay here all day having this conversation with you. I've enjoyed it so much. So you've had the opportunity to be an educator formally, teaching at the Naval Academy. You have 6 children who have experienced education. You have multiple degrees, so you are certainly spent a lot of time as a student. What would you say would be takeaways that you may have from your career as a Marine that might be great for educators to hear? Here's something that I learned as a Marine that educators really could benefit from. What would you share with the many ed leaders, superintendents, principals, teachers who listen to the podcast? What can we take from you, Colonel Ferry?
The first thing that jumped to my mind is education never stops. So I think of myself 3 decades now in the military. I feel like I continue to learn every day. And I make a dedicated, the best leaders as well, the best educators continue to dedicate time to getting smarter, either getting smarter in their exact profession or being very broad, because, multidisciplinary, studies, just makes you a better person, a better educator, better leader. So that's probably the first thing I would just pops on mind. It never stops, I really enjoy spending time around senior leaders, and I ask them, what are they reading now? How they need to develop, So whether I'm reading books, listening to podcasts about leadership, I love it, So that's probably the first thing. We always, usually if you're an educator, you understand that. But certainly students, tend to forget, hey, you never stop or you never stop, that just grows you as a person. So that's probably the first thing that pops in mind. You never stop learning, and learn from, and continue to spread, your wings as far as what you're learning from. Pulling, I'm a engineer by trade, a science kind of guy, stuff like that is my passion was. But I'm passionate about. I never sit down and read a science book. I'm reading history. I'm reading, stories. Whether it's English novels and stuff like that. It just makes you a better writer, a better speaker. So broaden your kind of horizons of what you're pulling in.
There you go. That goal to be a Renaissance man. Colonel Ferry, again, as a dad myself, as a citizen, as an educator, as a veteran for a very brief period in my life, I just want to thank you again for your service. Thank the men and women for all that they're doing for all of us and all you continue to do. And Colonel, I want to say thank you especially for spending time with me today in this conversation and for sharing your wisdom over almost a 30-year career and all the experiences you've had with our listeners. Thank you, Colonel.
Yes, sir. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it. Hopefully I'll get to come back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Colonel.
I hope that you enjoyed our time today with Colonel Ferry. As he said, leadership is influence. May we all use our influence to make the world a better place. Thank you for spending time with me today, and thank you for all that you do for every student, every teacher, and every staff member. You are making a difference. If no one else has told you, I want you to know that I believe in you. Good day.
Thank you for listening to the EdLeader podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and consider leaving a review with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts so that we may continue to grow the EdLeader community. We hope that you have enjoyed your time with Dr. Jackson. Until next time.